Ogre Kingdoms are all but confirmed for Warhammer 3, so what can we expect of their battlefield roster? Well, for those who don't know the tabletop, like myself, we're going to take a look and see what kind of units we can expect for the Ogre Kingdoms in Warhammer 3. So I'm going to make use of this image made by the second one. Shout out to him. He's got a YouTube channel with a couple of lore videos on there. They're really good quality, but there's only a couple. Worth checking out, I'd say. Link in the top of the description. So, Ogre Kingdoms tabletop roster. Now, you may notice it's somewhat color-coded. The orange units are the 8th edition units, so the latest units before it got killed off, of course. And all the other colors are older editions of the game, so we're not going to focus on those too much. We're going to focus on the 8th edition models because they're probably more likely to actually go into the game overall. So, let's kick it off with the named characters, or what will likely be our legendary lords. Goldtooth, the first one, who has quite an eye-catching model. Big chunky ogre. Looks like he's being carried by some nobblers, the Ogre Kingdoms form of goblins, essentially. He's got some treasure, he's got a crown on, he's got a big scepter, so he's most likely going to be our main legendary lord, as he is the leader of the Ogre Kingdoms, apparently. So he's got to be in there, right? He's a very likely candidate. Next to him, we see Scrag the Slaughterer, who's got blades for arms, I guess. A bit of a cauldron behind him with a goblin mix in it, perhaps. So he could be an option, kind of the butcher vibes going on. And this is, of course, assuming that we're going to get 2 legendary lords. Because we're getting 2 with Kislev and Cathay, I would assume we get 2 with Ogre Kingdoms, because they're not Chaos, who are only getting 1 lord each. So we'll work on the assumption that we're getting 2, but if it's only going to be 1, then it's most definitely going to be Greasus. The other 2 potential options here, Golgfag, Maneater, and Brag the Gutsman. If it had to be one of these 2, I'd say Brag might be more likely, because he's a bit more of a striking model, I would say, with the big old chain scythe, or whatever the hell you want to call that, and the executioner's mask. Looks pretty damn cool. And the other guy kind of looks like a shaman, if anything, but I doubt he is. I don't know. But we got some cool legendary lord options there, I think. But not to discount these other options from older editions that maybe you might get a look. Dark Iron Skin looks pretty cool on that big heavily armored mount. But moving on to the more possible generic kind of lords, the Tyrant and the Slaughter Master. Both looking pretty damn cool. They could be generic lord options, or maybe heroes if one of them doesn't fit in the lord category. The Slaughter Master especially striking, I think, with that whole butcher vibe, much like Scrag the Slaughterer. Hard to really say what we can expect from them in terms of combat abilities, or whether they'll be armor piercing or anti-large and things like that. So we just have to kind of wait and see on all that, I think. Depends what Games Workshop and Creative Assembly want to do with them. That, of course, goes for all of these units. Now, the other potential lord options we have here, a Nobbler Head Honcho and a Nobbler Head Honcho on Rhinox. So a bit of a rhino looking mount. These might be similar to Goblin Big Bosses, really. But as older edition stuff, it may be less likely that we see them. So to some possible hero choices, the Bruiser, the Butcher, and the Firebelly, who I think we can agree is probably the most eye-catching of the bunch. An ogre that breathes fire in a kind of circus fire eater type fashion. That could be a really fun unit. And then we got the Bruiser and the Butcher, who are kind of similar to the Tyrant and the Slaughter Master, perhaps those lords. And the Butcher and maybe Slaughter Master actually have ties to magic. Apparently they can turn hunger to magical feats or something like that. Any lore nerds, feel free to fill me in on all of this or correct me if need be. But perhaps they might have something to do with Ogre Kingdoms magic, should they have some. And then we have the Hunter and the Hunter on Stonehorn. So possibly an anti-large hero here. He's got javelins of some kind on his back. So ranged anti-large hero, perhaps. And then the one on the Stonehorn, the big massive beastie, I'm sure that can only really be good for one thing, smashing things in melee. But maybe he'll still be able to use javelins and a ranged attack from atop that. Or maybe the Stonehorn itself will be anti-large. And then we've got the Hunter accompanied by Saber Tusks. So they got some kind of saber-toothed tigery kind of creature. But this model maybe seems quite unlikely in Total War, because you'd have to have those 2 tiger models alongside an ogre, but I guess that's kind of been done with Skarsnik, who has Gobbler at his side and things like that, so maybe not completely implausible. But that is older edition stuff, so we might not see that. There's also the Nobbler Honcho, who again is older edition, so might not see him, but he might be like a big boss type deal, Goblin Big Boss, if he were to be in there. And then onto the regular infantry, it's pretty much all Nobblers, or Goblins if you like. The only one in 8th edition is Nobbler Fighters. Then we've got all these other ones, Nobbler Trappers here. Perhaps they can be anti-large or catch things, slow things down, kind of like nasty Skulkers maybe. But then there's these older edition ones, Nobbler Fighter, Hand Weapon, Nobbler Fighters with shields, Flingers, so there's some ranged options in there. So maybe we will see some of these units. They're not going to be completely written off, of course. It would make sense for them to have some little Goblin archery type units, Flingers. man-biters, whatever they do. They got a little flail there. Man-biters with shields. A few other random ones down here. So, a whole bunch of infantry options. Cheap, chaffy infantry, just like goblins for the greenskins. Might just be those 8th edition Nobler fighters, but maybe we'll see some of these other units come to life as well. Down into the monstrous infantry, we see the units that we kind of have already in Warhammer 2. The bulls just look like regular ogres that we have, and then Bull's additional hand weapon is dual weapons, one would assume, as they're all carrying 2 weapons, although one with a skull banner type thing. And then we have Bull's Iron Fist. Now, there isn't too much info on these, other than they sometimes use that Iron Fist as a shield or to potentially smash things face in. Seems like they have an arm cut off and then have it replaced with some kind of tool. Some of them have a blade, one of them has like a blunt stump or something. So maybe they'll just kind of be shielded ogres or possibly anti-large with those big hooky scythe arms. And then moving on, we have the Iron Guts, who are kind of the elite ogre infantry. 2-handed weapon, lots of armor on. They're kind of the Black Orcs or Chosen of the Ogre Kingdoms. Big, tough, damage dealer, expensive probably, infantry. And then we have the Lead Belchers. These big boys are basically carrying cannons. So you can imagine how that's going to go. Maybe they'll have big long range like Jezzails or Deck Gunners. If that is the case and they're firing cannonballs, they're probably only going to be a few of them in a unit. So they're probably going to be bordering on kind of a mobile artillery kind of vibe. And then we've got the Man-Eaters, who we have in the game already. The Man-Eater Ogre is just like a stronger version of a normal Ogre. So we have the Great Weapon version in Warhammer 2 and the Pistol version. Maybe there's going to be just like a normal infantry version, which are just better at the job than the crappy little normal Ogres that we have, which might be those bulls. So we'll have to see. But we got some cool options here in the monstrous infantry, which is going to be our main infantry of the Ogre Kingdoms. Moving on down to the cavalry, we've got the Mournfang Cavalry, who of course are in the game already. Mournfang Cavalry Iron Fists, so they might just be a shielded version. As we say, the Iron Fists apparently used as shields, so that could just be what they do. And then the Great Weapon version, more than likely probably an anti-large version of the Mournfang Cavalry. And then there's some older edition stuff of those Rhinoxes that we saw earlier. So maybe alongside the Mournfang Cav, we'll have these Rhinoxes as well. So there'll be a couple of different kinds of Cav. Maybe they'll be bigger, heavier, hit harder. Maybe they're the elite version of Mournfangs. And then we've got Pigback Riders, who I think it's just 2 Nobblers, one riding the other. So I'm pretty sure we probably won't see those. Hopefully anyway. Christ. Down on into the monster section though, we get pretty interesting. The Saber Tusk Pack, we saw those earlier on that character. Those could be kind of like War Lions or any kind of Warhounds really. Nice, fast, maybe armor-piercing type cavalry unit. And then we see Yetis, which look pretty damn cool. Those would be a nice addition. They kind of look like trolls. Maybe they'd have that kind of function. Armor-piercing, maybe not that great in the leadership and stuff like that. Perhaps even anti-large, who knows? We also have the Gorgers, which just look like weird, slightly more athletic ogres, shall we say. Again, they could be armor-piercing, they could be anti-large. They look like they might be fast because they're so goddamn in shape. Look at those quads. This boy wasn't skipping leg day. But they seem like they're kind of the Savage Orcs of the Ogre Kingdoms, where you've got Greenskins and then you got Savage Orcs, you got Ogre Kingdoms, then you got Gorgers. That's kind of the vibe I'm getting. They're a little bit unruly, not so easily tamed, but they can be put to some kind of use for the Ogre Kingdoms. Onto some more monsters, we see the Slave Giant, who is probably just a regular old giant that we have in all the other factions already. So that makes him quite plausible to go into their faction, as he's already there. And then we have the Stonehorn, that mount we saw earlier. This time mounted by an ogre with a big long weapon, so that might be some kind of spear, might make this an anti-large version, otherwise big anti-infantry killing from the monster perhaps. But there's also the Stonehorn Harpoon Launcher. Now this one seems more likely to be anti-large and maybe an artillery type monster, kind of Lizardmen-esque. This could be a very nice addition to the Ogre Kingdoms roster, giving them a few more ranged options because they don't have too many in their infantry department potentially. And then there's also the Thunder Tusk that looks like an absolute behemoth. It's got 2 ogres on the back. One of them's got a bit of a crossbow. The other's got a kind of flail thing. So who knows what the hell that thing could do. But that could be a really nice, really epic looking unit to see on the battlefield of Total War Warhammer. And then there's a bunch of older stuff of just feral monsters. Pretty much everything we've already seen. The Rhinox, the Mournfang, the Stonehorn. All just feral versions. Those I think are entirely plausible though, as we have that a lot in other factions like the Lizardmen of course. So we might see feral versions of all these monsters, which would make the faction overall very Lizardmen-like. Lots of larger monsters running around, some chaffy infantry, some stronger infantry, and some missile and ranged options as well. Which brings us to the artillery. Ogre Kingdoms do have some artillery options, so it means they're not going to be a totally aggressive race. They can sit back, use their artillery a bit before they charge in if they want to. The Nobbler Scrap Launcher, this might be a little shorter range, looks like a catapult type of deal. Maybe more like an Eagle Claw Bolt Thrower with the Infantry mode where it spreads out all over the place. Looks like it might do that kind of thing, rather than being like a Goblin Rock Lobber or anything. And then the Iron Blaster pretty much just looks like a cannon that's actually on a chariot. So that might be kind of like Little Grom for Kislev. A reasonably mobile single cannon, which would be nice because it would be able to keep up with the rest of the army. So you could keep a rush game plan going, but keep some artillery pressure as well. Same with the Nobbler Scrap Launcher. It's on a chariot, so it should be fairly mobile. So that's all the units we have here. There may be some units that aren't on this card, so maybe we're missing some, but I think we got the bulk of them here. So we can see what we're going to expect for Ogre Kingdoms in Warhammer 3, as they are most likely goddamn in there, right? But how will they play? Well, like I mentioned, I think they'll have a kind of Lizardmen or maybe Greenskinsy vibe. An Ogre Kingdoms army might look something like this. We could have those Nobblers up front, or Goblins here, or these would be like the Skinks of the Lizardmen. Those are up front, and then you've got the slightly tougher Infantry. These will be your more regular Ogres, kind of like the Orc Boys or the Saurus Warriors. Then we'll have our better Ogres or Man-Eaters around, our better monstrous Infantry, and then some single large stuff, most of it probably being quite fast by the looks of it, in a kind of Lizardmen or Tomb Kings kind of vibe. So that'll be kind of the main bulk of your attacking force, and then you'll have some missile units potentially, maybe some Nobbler ranged units. We've got the Man-Eater pistols, you'll have the Cavalry, the Mournfangs of different varieties perhaps. And we've also got those Saber Tusks as well, so they'll be kind of like War Lions, or the closest thing we have here, Goblin Wolf Riders. Maybe not quite the same, but close enough. Some kind of faster cavalry type unit. And then maybe those longer range sort of artillery units as well. That could be a really nice roster and give you a few different playstyles that you could approach with that, much like the Greenskins and Lizardmen can do. So that's maybe what I'm guessing the Ogre Kingdoms are going to play like. I can't find much online of how they played in Tabletop. If anyone knows or used to play them by any chance, do let us know. But I think that about does it. So there we go. The Ogre Kingdoms. I'm quite looking forward to them. The more I research them and learn about them, the more they grow on me. And they sound like a faction I might just enjoy. I hope you've enjoyed this. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the future.